Part 22. The Liu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yoon. Chapter 211. Chapter 211. Did you eavesdrop? Stop calling Xiaobai, let Xiaohui take him there another day, we are all classmates. Xia Wanfan came out from behind and said. Xiaobai looked at Xia Wanfan, nodded and walked to the cashier. As soon as the two ran out, it started to rain lightly. The rain was acceptable at first, but then it started to rain harder and harder. The two of them ran in the alley because they were running too fast, and mud and water would be thrown up every step they took. Liu Zizhu looked at the intensity of the rain and felt that running down was not an option, not to mention that Zhang Wanan was still ill and would be in trouble if he got seriously ill if he didn't take action quickly. He was looking for something while running. This alley was full of places to live, and there was no place to hide from the rain. If he had to find a place, it would be under the eaves of other people's houses. Liu Zizhu had no choice but to hide under the eaves of a house with Zhang Wanan. The family locked the door tightly, and there should be no one there, so hiding should be fine. Zhang Wanan panted heavily and stopped to look at the rain that was falling more and more outside and curled her lips. I can't walk anymore. It's okay, you'll be fine soon. It was originally a nice sunny day at noon, but within a few hours it turned into such bad weather, and they were unprepared. Is it cold? Liu Zizhu felt a little distressed when he saw the wet little girl. He should have been optimistic about the weather, and shouldn't have taken her for a walk on a whim. Zhang Wanan nodded. Liu Zizhu looked at the thin white shirt he was wearing and suddenly felt a headache. Where could he find some clothes for her to keep warm? Come to me, Liu Zizhu suddenly spoke in a low voice. Zhang Wanan was stunned for a moment, and the next second he got in with a smile and held his waist tightly. It's so warm, she said with a smile. Just stay warm and stay warm, I don't want to go to the hospital with you again. I know, I don't want to go either. The two of them stayed together under the eaves for about half an hour. The rain started to fall a little. Shall we go? Zhang Wanan shuddered as the wind blew through her. Although it is summer, it will rain when it rains, especially if you get wet, and a gust of wind will make you very cold. Liu Zizhu nodded and raised his big hand to cover her head, thinking that he could take care of things if he could. As soon as the two turned around and walked out, a young boy walked out from the corner. He was walking slowly with an umbrella, and the muddy water thrown up on his toes made the toes of his shoes a little dirty. Suddenly he stopped moving. He stood there holding an umbrella as motionless as a stone statue. He waited until Liu Zizhu and Zhang Wanan had completely gone away and disappeared into the alley before he started again. Then the young boy quickly ran to the door of the house where Zhang Wanan and Liu Zizhu had just taken shelter from the rain, took out the key, and opened the door with a creak. Zhang Baihui came back to get some materials for Xia Wanfan, but he didn't expect to see two people taking shelter from the rain from a distance. He didn't know what he was thinking at that time, but he didn't have the courage to come over. Liu Zizhu and Zhang Wanan had already walked out of the winding alley, and when they were standing under the pavilion waiting for the bus, Liu Zizhu suddenly smiled. Zhang Wanan looked up at the man who was laughing for no reason and wanted to know what he was laughing at. You're still laughing after being caught in the rain? Zhang Wanan suddenly became very serious. I just think it's very poetic, and the alley is quite nice, Liu Zizhu said. Why? Zhang Wanan was puzzled. Suddenly I remembered Dai Wangshu's rain alley. It's very beautiful, although we don't have oil paper umbrellas, Liu Zizhu said, looking back at the quiet alley. There is rain falling on the eaves of every house. If he can take pictures and has good photography skills, he will definitely take pictures of the alleys. Oh, it seems so, Zhang Wanan said with a smile. After finishing talking about the relaxed topic, Liu Zizhu suddenly changed the subject. Did you eavesdrop just now? End of this chapter. The Liu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yoon. Chapter 212. Chapter 212. Short selling. Zhang Wanan blushed. A car is coming, she pointed to try to divert his attention. Luzes who reached out to stop the car, but he did not forget the topic just now. He got in the car and reported the location to the master, then turned to Jongwanan and said, "It's time to answer my question." "I'm a little cold." Jongwanan rubbed her arms. "Young man, there is a blanket in the back. You and the little girl can put it on. You two will get wet and you will get sick," the driver said to him kindly. "Looks like he is a good father with children." Luzes who thanked him, took the blanket and wrapped it all around Jongwanan. "Wrap it up, don't get sick again." "I know." Nagging like a little old man. "Did you eavesdrop?" Luzes who asked her again. She thought he would forget this question. Jongwanan turned to look out the window and refused to speak. How could she admit to eavesdropping on something so embarrassing? Luzes who saw that she was unwilling to talk, so he didn't force him. He just said, "No eavesdropping is allowed in the future. What if someone else has some information and you overhear it? Are you going to steal Mr. Crab's secret recipe like a ruffian?" Jongwanan smiled. She looked back at him and said happily, "Xiao's Huzi, can you tell jokes now? I've always had a sense of humor." "Yes. It's so humorous that you can't tell," Jongwanan said with a sly smile. The rain was still pouring down until they got home. The two of them rushed back to the room, and there was a rapid knock on the door, which made Mrs. Wang jump. "Little ancestor, why are you so wet? You're going to catch a cold, especially Anan. Go take a hot bath and get back in bed. I'll make some soup for you." Sister-in-law Wang opened the door and saw two drowned rats and couldn't help but start talking. "Can you not drink the soup?" Jongwanan asked cutely. She had drank the soup cooked by Mrs. Wang so many times since she was a child that the smell made her want to vomit, so she was forced to hold her nose and drink it down in one breath every time. "No, you are still sick," Mrs. Wang patiently told the little girl. "But I don't want to drink it," Jongwanan pouted, not happy. Drink from a big bowl," Luzes whose eerie voice came from behind, and she couldn't help but shiver. Faced with the coercion of two people, the beautiful girl was speechless. "Then I'm going to cook," sister-in-law Wang pointed to the kitchen and said. Luzes who nodded, then pulled Jongwanan upstairs. "Hurry up and take a shower. After that, we'll watch a movie." Luzes who pushed her away and said. I know her interest in the movie was not high after hearing about it. Jongwanan went to take a shower, and Luzes who also returned to his room. When he was taking off his shirt, he suddenly remembered his wound. He looked sideways and found that the gauze had been soaked again. He sighed helplessly and took out the first aid kit, then pulled off the gauze and threw it aside. He did a good job in the disinfection process at first, but when it came to wrapping the gauze, it was because he had no experience. He couldn't wrap it up for a long time, and the gauze just hung loosely on his arm, which was of no use at all. Luzes who sighed and pulled it off irritably, looking up at the ceiling helplessly and suddenly wanting to relax. It would be fine if he took some time to relax, but who knew that when Mrs. Wang came up with soup and opened the door, she was frightened by the scene in front of her, and even exaggeratedly almost threw away the soup. Luzes who sat on the soft carpet and looked up at the ceiling. He was always cautious and subtle, and he didn't even hear her knocking on the door or opening the door. Sister-in-law Wang was stunned for a moment when she saw his arm still bleeding and the gauze on the ground. She hurriedly walked over and put the soup down, then walked over and squatted in front of Luzes who. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Lu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yun. Chapter 213. Chapter 213. Acting cute for the first time. Xiaozhou, what's wrong with you? Why are you injured? She asked anxiously. It would be heartbreaking if Lin 11 and Lu Lin saw this when they came back. Luzes who turned his head dully to look at Mrs. Wang, and then looked at the door. Why didn't he remember that Mrs. Wang knocked on the door? Oh, You just knocked on the door and you didn't hear me. I thought you were taking a shower and I brought the soup in without hearing you, Mrs. Wang explained to him. Luzes, who nodded understandingly, stood up, walked over and drank the bowl of hot soup in one gulp. Seeing that he suddenly became so dull and didn't answer any questions, sister-in-law Wang was almost anxious to death. She followed him and asked again, "How did you get hurt?" "I bumped into it," Luzes, who turned around and went back to sit in his original position. "What did you use to rub it on? Why is there so much blood?" Mrs. Wang said, picking up the used gauze from the carpet and throwing it into the trash can. Luzes, who shook his head, "Sister-in-law Wang, please help me wrap the gauze." "I didn't wrap it." He felt a little embarrassed at the end of the sentence. Seeing that he didn't want to say anything more, Mrs. Wang sighed helplessly, disinfected him again, and then carefully wrapped the gauze. "Be careful, don't touch the water," sister-in-law Wang warned. "It's a small injury, it's okay." Luzes, who didn't take it seriously. Sister-in-law Wang was speechless for a moment, shook her head helplessly and walked out. Luzes, who went to Zhangwanan's room after taking a shower and drying himself. He knocked lightly on the door, and soon a voice came from inside, "Please come in." Luzes, who smiled and opened the door, thinking that he was quite serious. Luzes, who pushed the door open and walked in. He saw Zhangwanan clumsily trying to wipe the ends of her hair. The carpet was wet with water from the ends of her hair. "Why are you so stupid? You can't even wipe your hair." Zhangwanan turned to look at him and said disdainfully, "Your hair is dripping too." Luzes, who paused for a moment, thinking that it was just the bangs in front of him that were still dripping. "Why are you paying so much attention?" He walked over and took the towel from Zhangwanan's hand, then pressed her shoulder and said in a commanding tone, "Sit down." "Why are you grabbing my towel? Use your own to wipe your hair." Zhangwanan didn't know why. She thought he was going to take it away to wipe her hair and she got angry and tried to take it away. Luzes, who suddenly wanted to tease her, raised the towel as high as he could, and said with a smile, "I'll give it to you when you get it." "You are bullying me for being short, right?" Zhangwanan yelled angrily and grabbed the towel in his hand with her teeth and claws. Luzes, who didn't even move the towel. He looked down and down at the jumping Zhangwanan with interest, and the corners of his lips couldn't help but rise. Zhangwanan danced for a long time but couldn't get it. She said angrily, "Give me the towel. Otherwise, the whole house will collapse in a moment." "Admit that you are fat," Luzes, who asked with a malicious smile. Zhangwanan stopped trying to grab him. She moved away from Luzes, who irritably and sat on the bed without looking at him. Luzes, who knew that he had made her angry again. He lowered his raised arm and walked over to hand the towel in front of Zhangwanan. "Here you go." He spoke like a 3-year-old child for a moment. Zhangwanan looked up and saw his unskilled expression of cuteness and couldn't help but laugh out loud. This was the first time he had acted cutely. His expression, well, it's hard to describe in words. "Aren't you angry anymore?" Luzes, who leaned over and asked with a smile. "I won't be angry with you because your cute expression looks like you've been poisoned," Zhangwanan said. "What does it mean to have an expression that looks like you've been poisoned?" He learned this from a certain male protagonist on TV. It was obviously his first time acting cute and he wasn't very good at it, so he acted like this, right? You will become more proficient in it in the future. Luzes, who took the towel from Zhangwanan again. This time Zhangwanan's face turned dark. She glared at him and was so angry that she didn't want to speak. "Sit down," Luzes, who still ordered in a commanding tone. Zhangwanan sat on the bed angrily and remained motionless. Luzes, who sighed and knelt on the bed with one leg and put the other on the ground. End of this chapter. The Lu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yun. Chapter 214. Chapter 214. Because a person falls in love with a drama. Zhangwanan sat on the bed angrily and remained motionless. Luzes, who sighed and knelt on the bed with one leg and put the other on the ground. Zhang Wanan was thinking about asking him what he was going to do when Luzes who had already put a towel on her head. Zhang Wanan wanted to turn her head to look at him, but Luzes who slapped her gently with his hand. Don't move. His voice was a little serious. What are you doing? Do you want to help me dry my hair? Zhang Wanan reacted and smiled. Luzes who only responded and started to move his hands. He was very gentle. He gently lifted her beautiful black shawl hair with his left hand, and wiped it gently with a towel in his left hand. After a few minutes, Luzes who got out of bed and went to the bathroom with the towel. When he came out again, he had a hair dryer in his hand, but the towel was missing. Blow with this, it dries very slowly. He lowered his head and fiddled with the thread on the hair dryer. Zhang Wanan nodded and sat on the stool to wait with peace of mind. Luzes who plugged in the electricity and stood behind Zhang Wanan. He lifted a strand of her hair and turned on the hair dryer. The gentle hot air blew through her hair, making it warm. Luzes whose hands were playing with her hair, and his fingertips would accidentally rub against her flesh. Zhang Wanan felt the tenderness he gave her, lowered her head and smiled without saying a word. Luzes who quickly dried her hair, which was still wet. Zhang Wanan touched it with his hand and nodded with satisfaction. He said seriously to Luzes who was putting away the hair dryer, I'm very satisfied. I'll see you next time I come to your store. Obviously she regarded Luzes who as the boy at the barber shop. Luzes who slapped her on the forehead with a dark face. No matter how big or small you are, please speak up. If you take any more pictures, you'll be stupid, Zhang Wanan said dissatisfiedly, rubbing her forehead. You know it, but if you're stupid, no one will want you, Luzes who said with a sly smile on his face at the end. You can take it if others don't want it. Zhang Wanan didn't take it seriously. He lay down comfortably on the bed and covered himself with a quilt and said, I'm going to bed. Call me for dinner. Have you drunk the soup? Luzes whose voice came from the bathroom. Zhang Wanan had just closed her eyes and opened them in shock at his words. She looked at the empty bowl and said hurriedly, drink it? Yeah. Luzes who had already come out of the bathroom. He walked to Zhang Wanan's bed, tucked her in, picked up the empty bowl, and left. After Luzes who left, Zhang Wanan opened her eyes and took a deep breath, thinking that she was lucky enough to be smart enough to pour out the soup early, otherwise she would have been forced to drink it by Luzes who again. After Zhang Wanan fell asleep, Luzes who went downstairs, turned on the TV, and sat on the sofa to watch Zhang Wanan's favorite program. As he watched, a line of words suddenly appeared in his mind for no apparent reason, because a person falls in love with a drama. But he felt that it was more like falling in love with a hobby because of a person. You know, he didn't have such a hobby as watching dramas before, but he fell in love with it after watching a little bit of it with Zhang Wanan last time. Sister Wang had prepared the dishes in the evening, and Luzes who had almost finished watching TV. He stood up and walked upstairs. Anan, it's time to get up and eat. He opened the door and called her softly. Zhang Wanan opened her eyes and looked at him in a daze. She didn't know what happened and suddenly gave him a silly hee-hee smile. Luzes who was confused by her, but he couldn't help but laugh when he saw her giggle. Time to eat. Zhang Wanan stretched out his hands above his head and then put his arms forward, flying towards Luzes who. Walk. Luzes who clearly bent down to pick her up, but when he brought her downstairs, he remembered that she had not put on her shoes yet. He put her on the sofa and said, wait, I'll get you some shoes. Zhang Wanan nodded obediently and fell down with his head tilted. End of this chapter. The Lu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yun. Chapter 215. Chapter 215. Two Styles. When Luzes who came down from upstairs, Zhang Wanan was no longer on the sofa. Luzes who glanced in the direction of the restaurant and sighed helplessly. He walked over with his shoes and sure enough he saw Zhang Wanan already sitting on the chair, her chin resting on the table, her eyes wide open as she looked at the dishes on the table. Why did you come here without wearing shoes? Didn't I tell you to wait? Luzes who walked over and bent down to put on her shoes for her. Waiting for Luzes who to help her put on her shoes, Zhang Wanan swung her feet under the table and stared at the dishes on the table and said with a smile, "The restaurant smells so delicious. I'm so greedy for you. Why don't you eat it when it's so delicious?" Luzes who sat down opposite her. "Isn't this waiting for you? It's not fair to eat alone first." Zhang Wanan winked and said, but Luzes who had already picked up her chopsticks and started eating as soon as she sat down. "Eat slowly, no one will compete with you." "I understand, but it doesn't taste good when it's cold, so you should eat it too," Zhang Wanan said while eating. Luzes who nodded. The two of them had completely different eating styles. Zhang Wanan ate ravenously, while Luzes who ate elegantly. It felt like the two of them had swapped genders. Zhang Wanan's way of eating should not belong to a girl like her. Seeing how she was eating, Ms. Wang hurriedly filled her with a bowl of soup and put it aside for emergencies. Sure enough, Zhang Wanan choked in the next second. She choked until her neck and face turned red. Luzes who noticed that she had choked and hurriedly ran to her side, patted her back and said, "I told you to slow down, you ate it, are you choking now?" Zhang Wanan glanced at him and was about to refute, but before she could say anything, she started coughing again. Luzes who picked up the soup in front of her and brought it to her mouth. "Take a sip." Zhang Wanan was obedient this time, and obediently went up to take a sip, but it didn't seem to have any effect. "Sister-in-law Wang, get a glass of water," Luzes who shouted. Sister-in-law Wang heard the sound and brought a glass of water. Seeing that Zhang Wanan was choking hard, she patted her on the back several times. Finally, under the patting and giving of water by the two of them, Zhang Wanan's coughing was no longer so serious. So a little bit of a slight cough. "You're really worthless," Luzes who almost stabbed her in the head. This time Luzes who was really angry. He thought, how could there be such a girl? She almost gave up her life just to eat. The attitude just now almost scared him. It's simply too serious. Zhang Wanan coughed until her eyes were full of tears. She looked pitifully at Luzes who and wanted to ask for his forgiveness, but all she got in exchange was a cold snort from Luzes who. Luzes who didn't say another word during the meal, and Zhang Wanan also calmed down a bit. "Are you full?" Luzes who asked Zhang Wanan after finishing his meal and wiping his mouth. Zhang Wanan immediately smiled when he heard him ask himself. He thought he was ignoring him. Zhang Wanan nodded hurriedly and wiped his mouth. "I've finished eating. Let's go." Luzes who stretched out his hand. Zhang Wan was at ease, jumped off the chair and hugged his arm. "Where are you going?" "Of course we're going to watch a movie after eating, we've agreed." Luzes who dragged the little girl hanging on his arm. "Okay, I'll get food and drinks." After saying that, he ran away. She will definitely be very happy when it comes to delicious food. If there is an eating competition, she will never lose. Luzes who was sitting in the living room waiting for her. After a while, Zhang Wanan brought 2 bags of potato chips and 2 bottles of Coke. "Jojo, there are no snacks," she said pitifully with her lips curled up. Buy, buy, I will buy it for you when I take you to school tomorrow." "Why do you eat so fast?" "You can't do it if you like it," Zhang Wanan roared. Okay, let's go." Luzes who took the things in her hands and walked upstairs. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Lu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yun. Chapter 216. Chapter 216 Differences between men and women. I'm not talking about you. Eating so fast is not good for your stomach and you can easily choke. Why do you bother? Luzes who asked while walking on the stairs. Eat it quickly and you'll feel it. It's delicious, Zhang Wanan said sheepishly, lowering his head. I really don't want to talk to you anymore. I'll change it later. I feel so bad if you choke on your food. I won't give you food next time, Loses, who also tried hard to persuade her. I know, I won't be Jojo anymore. Jongwon smiled and rubbed her chubby cheek against his bony hand. Loses, who felt his mood improved instantly, and nodded but still pretended to be serious. The two of them had gone upstairs and then reached the end of the corridor. There is a home theater at the end of the corridor on the second floor of their house. Because Lin 11 usually likes to watch movies, Lu Lin set it up for her. But lately Lin 11 has been so busy that she can barely touch the floor, so no one has opened the door for a long time, except for cleaning. What are you looking at? Loses, who turned on the device and sat down comfortably with his hands behind his head. Not to mention that the seat is quite comfortable, dozens of times more comfortable than a movie theater. He has never been in it before. This is the first time he has experienced it, and he realizes that his father is really willing to spend a lot of money for his mother. This is definitely not cheap. Jongwon also sat down. She closed her eyes and thought for a while, but in the end she only said the three words, "I don't know." Loses, who was speechless. The two of them stared at the big screen in a daze for a while, wondering why they came to watch a movie without thinking about anything. Loses, who thought for a while and said, "Let's find someone who is quite popular recently." I know. Previously, my classmates were discussing a movie about Little Neza in class. Zhang Baihui invited me to see it, but I didn't even go. I really want to see it, Zhang said excitedly. It's Jiang Baihui again. This boy Jiang Baihui is absolutely first class in flirting with girls, Loses, who thought. What are you watching with him? Watch it with me, Loses, who said domineeringly, and then walked over to look for movies. He walked over and tuned out the popular movie, then sat back down. It looks good, he said. Jongwon said tisk, tisk, thinking that the jealousy was overturned again. I have to say that the movie that has been discussed by classmates for a long time is indeed excellent. Jongwon was so fascinated by it that she even forgot to put her favorite snacks in her mouth. Loses, who calmed down when he saw that she was looking at her seriously. After the two of them finished reading, Jongwon clapped her hands excitedly and shouted, "It looks good. It looks good." Loses, who glanced at the door and thought that the sound insulation effect was good, otherwise he would have thought that the little girl was crazy. It's true that a movie is good, but it mainly depends on who is watching it with you, Loses, who coughed twice and leaned forward. Jongwon opened her eyes and said excitedly, "I feel like Neza and Ao Bing are watching with me. One of us is so happy. A child cannot be taught." After watching the movie, Jongwon and Loses, who walked out feeling relaxed. Jongwon stretched and ran to her room. Before closing the door, she revealed her head and said, "Go and have a rest early, Jojo." I said, "Go to bed early," Jongwon repeated. "Didn't you just wake up not long ago?" Loses, who was a little confused, but he just woke up, had a meal and watched a movie. It was not 3 hours ago, right? Want to sleep, don't you? You don't care when I went to sleep or when I woke up, I'm sleeping." After saying that, Jongwon had already closed the door. Loses, who saw the closed door and actually wanted to ask why she suddenly wanted to sleep in her room tonight. But after thinking about it, as both of them have grown up, it would be better to do this sooner. After all, men and women are different. He turned around and went back to his room and closed the door. After taking the exam, he took care of the sick Jongwon. He hadn't read a word of the book these days, and he suddenly felt that it was time to read something. End of this chapter. The Lu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yoon. Chapter 217. Chapter 217, Little Enemies. The next day, Loses, who went to the supermarket after sending Jongwon to school. Yesterday, Jongwon said that there were no snacks. Anyway, he had nothing to do, so he might as well go buy some. He already knew what she liked to eat by heart. The other side. Zhang Wanan walked to the door of the classroom and was about to enter when he bumped into Zhang Baihui, who was walking out. The two collided head-on. "Hi," Zhang Wanan greeted him. Zhang Baihui was obviously stunned for a moment when he saw him, but he quickly came to his senses and greeted her. "Good morning, I thought you weren't coming today either." "Ah, I just accompanied Xiao Jojo to take the exam, and I didn't come because I was sick. I won't miss school for no reason, otherwise Xiao Jojo will beat me up," Zhang Wanan said exaggeratedly. "Are you sick? I was in such a hurry yesterday that I didn't even have time to ask you." "It's okay, everything is fine, otherwise how could I appear in front of you today?" Zhang Baihui looked at her from bottom to top and nodded. "That's right." Zhang Wanan chuckled. "Where are you going?" "Go to the teacher." "Then you go ahead and we'll talk when you come back later." Zhang Baihui nodded and walked towards the office. Even though she is already in the 4th grade, she has always shared a seat with Zhang Baihui in the past 4 years. Because the teacher thought the two of them were very good, they never changed. Su Jiaojiao and He Chiu were also able to meet one-on-one with the teacher. However, the two of them did not get along peacefully, and they often fought. Zhang Wanan stood at the door and took a look, and sure enough he found that the two people were starting to do it again. At this moment, they seemed to be drawing the 38th line on the table. Zhang Wanan shook her head and thought that these two people were really a pair of little enemies. Su Jiaojiao has sharp eyes. She saw Zhang Wanan as soon as she returned to her seat. She didn't even bother to draw the 38th line. She dropped the pen in her hand and ran over. "Ancestor! You are finally here. I miss you so much," Su Jiaojiao hugged Zhang Wanan excitedly. If He Chiu hadn't come over in time, Zhang Wanan would probably have died today. Su Jiaojiao was so excited that she couldn't control her strength well. Su Jiaojiao let go of Zhang Wanan. Zhang Wanan coughed a few times with red eyes and said with a smile, "Sister, you are so excited." "I miss you," Su Jiaojiao said coquettishly. Zhang Wanan felt that this was not the style she should have, and suddenly she felt nauseated. She looked at Su Jiaojiao and said seriously, "Sister, you have changed. You were not so disgusting before." Su Jiaojiao was speechless for a while and finally returned to his previous appearance. "For the sake of your return today, shall I treat you to a big chicken drumstick?" Su Jiaojiao winked with a hint of seduction. "Since it's you who invited me, I'm welcome," Zhang Wanan said with a smile. They have been used to this for a long time, and there is no reason to be embarrassed at all. Zhang Baihui came back from the teacher's office when class was about to start, and Zhang Wanan was sitting in his seat doing nothing. Zhang Baihui came up from behind and poked her and asked, "What are you doing? Are you in a daze?" Zhang Wanan came back to his senses and asked, "Are you back?" Zhang Baihui nodded and sat on his seat. "I was quite surprised to see you yesterday," Zhang Baihui said first after being silent for a while. "Me too, but the wontons made by my aunt are really delicious, and even Xiaohuza loves them." Zhang Wanan wanted to drool when she thought of yesterday's wontons. Zhang Baihui smiled and said, "I'll bring you something to eat next time." After thinking about it, he smiled and added, "Bring a portion for you and your boat." "Thank you, but I still need money, but please don't charge me delivery fees," Zhang Wanan said jokingly. Zhang Baihui smiled and nodded. "It's not easy for my mother. Neighbors all say that my grandpa is rich, yes, but my mother never wants his money. She relies on herself," Zhang Baihui said. End of this chapter. The Lu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yun. Chapter 218. Chapter 218. Witness the great moment together. Zhang Wanan was stunned for a while. She didn't expect that Zhang Baihui would suddenly say this to her, but she did want to know. She was a little curious when she heard what others said yesterday. Moreover, she never thought that such a gentle person would live in such a family. She didn't know whether she didn't take it seriously or was pretending. Do you know why no one has ever come to hold a parent-teacher conference for me? My dad is very busy and often travels on business. My mom wants to come but is always stopped by her dad. Zhang Baihui looked at the blackboard with a dull look. What words? Zhang Wanan couldn't help but ask. You don't have to come, I will go. I will go when I get back from a business trip, or I will ask the secretary to go. This is what his father said. Why don't you let your mother come? Zhang Wanan seemed to have 100,000 whys. He doesn't want us to meet often. I go to my mother's shop secretly, Zhang Baihui said with a wry smile. This was the first time Zhang Wanan saw Zhang Baihui like this. She felt that she had seen many Jiang Baihui in the past 2 days, different Jiang Baihui. Zhang Wanan still wanted to say something, but as the bell rang, the teacher came in. As a good student, Zhang Baihui just looked at her and said nothing. Even when there was lunch after class, Zhang Baihui didn't mention it again, and Zhang Wanan didn't have the nerve to ask more, as if the matter had never been mentioned before. Asterisk. On the day when the high school entrance examination results were announced, Zhang Wanan was even more anxious than Lu Zizhu. Since Lin 11 and Tang Yu were often busy in the store and no one took care of her, she had been living in the Lu family, with Mrs. Wang taking care of the two of them. Zhang Wanan woke up very early that morning. She didn't even have time to wash up before she ran out barefoot and knocked on Lu Zizhu's door. The door was opened soon, and Lu Zizhu had already washed himself and got dressed. He looked down at the little girl who was several heads shorter than him and asked, "Why do you get up so early?" Zhang Wanan squeezed in from the side and said, "You will get good results today." Lu Zizhu turned around and closed the door. "I know, I was asking why you got up so early." "Because it depends on your results. I want to witness this great moment with you," Zhang Wanan said extremely seriously. Lu Zizhu smiled and suddenly remembered something. After a pause, he said, "This is not a great moment. I think the wedding is." Huh? Zhang Wanan was stunned by what he said. Lu Zizhu shrugged and said it was nothing, but when Zhang Wanan reacted, she was already blushing. She lowered her head and said in a low voice, "I also want to witness that great moment with you at the wedding." "Okay, I'm looking forward to that day," Lu Zizhu said in a good mood and walked to the window to stretch. Zhang Wanan jumped on the bed and took Lu Zizhu's computer, but after looking at it, she didn't know where the entrance to check results was. How do I check my scores?" Zhang Wanan asked with a confused expression as he looked at the computer. Lu Zizhu walked towards her, took the computer, put it on the table, and then lay down. "What are you doing?" Zhang Wanan watched helplessly as the computer was taken away by him. "Tisk, why is the emperor not in a hurry?" "But the is," Lu Zizhu asked her with a sidelong glance. "You are the eunuch," Zhang Wanan said angrily, "I just want to witness this great moment with you." "There's no rush, there are a lot of people now and we won't be able to get in for a while," Lu Zizhu said slowly. "Sure. You can enter a few more times. Give me your computer and I'll check it," Zhang Wanan said impatiently, as if the results were hers. "I'm not in a hurry, just a moment, Lu Zizhu coaxed patiently. "I want it now." Zhang Wanan became a little willful at this moment. Lu Zizhu tried to coax her several times but she refused to listen and insisted on making inquiries immediately. "Are you not confident in yourself?" Zhang Wanan couldn't help but even said this in the end. Lu Zizhu was suddenly speechless. He asked, "Zhang Wanan, do you think I lack self-confidence?" He called her by her full name, even with a scary look in his eyes. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Lu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yun. Chapter 219. Chapter 219 Celebrating with great fanfare. No, 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 I provoked you, Zhang Wanan said with a hurried smile. That's enough, I'm very confident in myself, but now is not the time. I don't care about my grades. I'll just take a look at them later, Loses Who said, lying comfortably on the bed. She doesn't understand the world of top academics, forget it. 10 minutes later, Loses Who was finally helpless by Jongwanan. He walked over and took the computer and put it on the bed. Check it, he said. I don't know how to check. Jongwanan blinked at him with big eyes. Loses Who sighed helplessly, lowered his head and typed a few words on the keyboard, then entered his admission ticket and pressed the enter key. If you don't obey me, you have to check your scores now. There are many people checking your scores now, and the network is very stuck, so you can't get in, Loses Who said helplessly. Then I'll check a few more times. I have nothing to do, Jongwanan said excitedly, shaking his head. The two of them looked at the circles on the web page over and over again. They didn't know how many times they circled the web page, but Loses Who's results finally appeared in front of them. Yeah, I got the delicious food, Jongwanan said excitedly, clenching his fists when the results came out. Loses Who also showed a satisfied smile when he saw the results. The total score of Jinjinj High School entrance examination was 700, while Loses Who's total score was 696, only 4 points short of a perfect score. The whole school placed its hopes on him, and his results would definitely not disappoint the school. I promised to take you to eat delicious food when the results are out. I am very satisfied with the results. I will pick you up and eat delicious food if I have time tomorrow, Loses Who said in a good mood. Okay, my little boat is great, Jongwanan said, getting up and grabbing his neck and licking his face. Loses Who blushed slightly, touched her head and said, you should also study hard. We are going to the same school. I am in high school and you are in junior high school. We are a perfect match. Okay, Jongwanan nodded solemnly and accepted the task. Lin 11, Tang Yu, and Lu Lin all entered the Lu family's house at the same time at noon. The three of them looked at each other and went upstairs. Surprise, the three people shouted in unison as they pushed open Loses Who's bedroom door. Loses Who and Jongwanan looked over and saw three people standing at the door with smiles on their faces. Lin 11 had a big cake in his hand, Lu Lin had a lot of snacks, and Tang Yu was holding a gift box. What was in the gift box? What? Surprise! 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 Jongwanan saw the three people shouting 3 times in a row, then jumped out of bed and ran over to hug the three people, but her arms were short and she could only hug them one by one. Loses Who looked at them and said, it seems that we already know everything, so I don't need to waste any more words. Yes, 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 I know, I'll make you proud, Lu Lin teased him, but he was very happy in his heart. Your head teacher just called me and said that you are the top scorer in this year's high school entrance examination, with the highest score, son. You are great, Lin 11 said excitedly. Xiao's Huza said, keep a low profile, mother, we have to keep a low profile, how about we keep a high profile after Anan passes the exam, Jongwanan asked slyly. His words made the already lively atmosphere even more lively, and several people burst into laughter. Lu Lin said dotingly, when Anan passes the exam, Dad will congratulate you with great fanfare. Okay, Jongwanan jumped up excitedly. She subconsciously looked at Loses Who and found that Loses Who was looking at her and smiling. She smiled at him and turned around and jumped into his H. Today, everyone was happy because of Loses Who's achievements. The three of them simply stopped working and stayed at home to celebrate as a family. Obviously the person who did well in the exam should be the happiest, but this family is completely different. Loses Who seems to be a person outside the situation, but they are like people who did well in the exam. However, considering Loses Who's personality, it is normal to react like this. If he is very excited, it is abnormal. End of this chapter. The Lu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yoon. Chapter 220. Chapter 220. If I don't swell, who will? Loses who, you leave away for the future juniors and girls. In the future, the teacher will tell them to strive for another talent like you. When loses who went to school to get his compulsory education diploma, the head teacher grabbed him and said. Loses who thought for a while and said 8 words, study hard and make progress every day. The head teacher stared at him speechlessly. Teacher, I went to high school here, and I haven't left this school. It's just the difference between the junior high school and the high school. This time it was loses who's turn to be speechless. Yes, you are right. When school starts, I will go to the principal and apply for you to give a speech. I will talk about how to study. Then I will only say study hard and make progress every day. This is my learning method, loses who said seriously. Okay, 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 just say whatever makes you happy. Loses who nodded, okay. Then, teacher, I'll leave first. See you when school starts, loses who said and took a step forward. What's wrong? You don't want to see me at the class reunion? The head teacher asked seriously. Loses who paused and turned around to smile at the head teacher. See you, we'll see you as soon as you go. Because loses who suddenly laughed, the head teacher panicked. You, why are you laughing? He asked nervously. He has never seen loses who smile. This is the first time he has seen him smile in these years. He would be lying if he said he was not panicked. Loses who turned around and looked at the class teacher seriously. After a few seconds, he bent down and bowed solemnly. Thank you for your teaching, and I wish you good health, old man. He imitated the nickname given to the class teacher by others in his class. The class teacher suddenly felt his eyes heat up. He turned his head to look outside and then turned back and said, okay, okay, you kid, don't keep a straight face from now on. Your sudden smile made the teacher a little panicked. Continue to study hard in the future. Set an example for the younger students. Loses who nodded, glanced at the old man and said, let's go, see you at the party. Slow down. The head teacher watched his back disappear at the end, and suddenly felt a heat on his hand as if something had fallen. Asterisk. Gu Jinchu, who got good grades in the high school entrance examination, was even more excited than usual. After receiving the monetary reward, he came to loses who's house in a hurry. How is it? You are going to be a schoolmate with me again. We are tied together and inseparable, he said, putting his arm around loses who's shoulders. Loses who glanced coldly at the hand on his shoulder, and Gu Jinchu felt the scalding heat on his hand and quickly took it away. Fortunately, my brother started a small business, otherwise I would definitely not be able to go to such a good high school, Gu Jinchu continued to chatter. A few months before his high school entrance examination, his unreliable parents suddenly hired a tutor. From then on, he was imprisoned and basically couldn't play ball every day. He only studied and studied. Later, he finally took the high school entrance examination. At the end, he was liberated, and then his results came out and he became rich. Avril went on a trip and will be back tomorrow. Anan is on vacation tomorrow. Shall we go out for dinner? You please. Please. I have money now. If I don't expand, who will? He said loudly. Okay, let's go, loses who agreed easily. Gu Jinchu looked at him doubtfully, shook his head and said, no, this is not your style. It was difficult for you to get an appointment before. Since it's your treat, who would shirk it? Loses who said with a raised eyebrow. That seems to mean, anyone who doesn't take advantage of an advantage is a fool. Come on, brothers, since I didn't have money before and you always gave me relief, I will definitely bring you something to eat tomorrow. Yes, if you have no money, please let us continue to provide relief to you. What are you talking about? Talking about money hurts feelings, Gu Jinchu said seriously. Loses who glanced at him and said, let's go downstairs and play games. So the two decided happily and ran downstairs to start playing games crazily. End of this chapter.